As Dada said, I'm here to talk about an endangered species, and that is Bohemians. Normally, we don't think of Bohemians as an endangered species, and it could be that we don't think of Bohemians at all. But in writing my book about the Chelsea Hotel, This Ain't No Holiday Inn, I was able to encounter a lot of Bohemians and a lot of artists, crazy, wonderful, amazing, brilliant artists. When I started writing this book, I was young, took a long time to get it published. I was arrogant, and I said, I am going to write the definitive book about the Chelsea Hotel. I am going to write the book. The Chelsea Hotel is in Chelsea, the Chelsea district of Manhattan, and it's famous for housing amazing wealth of artists. It's a residence hotel, which means you can either rent a room, like an apartment room, for as long as you can pay for it, or you can come as a tourist and visit for a day or a night or a few days or whatever. So it's a mixture of apartments and hotel rooms. Here are some of the people that lived full-time at the Chelsea Hotel, just to give you an idea of its cred. Mark Twain, O. Henry, Sarah Bernhardt, famous actress. She lived on the penthouse floor under a glass pyramid that she had built in her own casket. She was a Bohemian. Lily Langtry, another one. In the 1910s and 20s, Edgar Lee Masters, author of the Spoon River anthology, lived there. John Sloan, the ashcan painter. In the 1930s, novelist Thomas Wolfe of You Can't Go Home Again, high modernist novel, lived there. Frida Kahlo lived there. Diego Rivera lived there. They need no introduction. In the 1940s and 50s, Dylan Thomas lived there. Tennessee Williams, William Burroughs, Willem de Kooning, Virgil Thompson, amazing cast of writers, artists, painters, and musicians. It really hit its stream in the 1960s and 70s. Bob Dylan wrote Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands at the Chelsea Hotel. Joni Mitchell wrote Chelsea Morning at the Chelsea Hotel, after which Bill and Hillary Clinton named their daughter Chelsea. Jimi Hendrix lived there. Leonard Cohen had a very famous song, I don't know if you know about it, it's about sex with Janis Joplin at the Chelsea Hotel. He later regretted kissing and telling. Jimi Hendrix, Gore Vidal, Vladimir Nabokov, author of Lolita, Patti Smith, obviously, and Robert Mapplethorpe, and Larry Kramer, the pop artist, lived there. In the 70s, the Warhol scene had a big contingency at the Chelsea Hotel. So in addition to the punkers, you had Sid Vicious, Johnny Thunders, filmmakers, Stanley Kubrick lived there. Milos Forman, who made One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, lived there. William Eggleston, the famous photographer, first color photographer in the MoMA, lived there. Andy Warhol scene, Edie Sedgwick lived there. Viva, the actress, lived there. The poet Rene Ricard lived there, and the writer Victor Bockris lived there then. And in the 80s, Dee Dee Ramone of the Ramones lived there. And some old beat writers, when they were in their 70s and 80s, they lived there too. Herbert Huncke, Gregory Corso, and then the musicologist and experimental filmmaker Harry Smith lived there as well. Now that's the tip of the iceberg. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of great artists lived at the Chelsea Hotel. Why, you may ask? It's really due to one person, a man named Stanley Bard. He was the manager and one-third owner of the Chelsea Hotel, and he happened to like artists. Now, Stanley Bard was an accountant. He was trained as an accountant, and he was a businessman. He ran a hotel. The purpose of a hotel is to make money. The way you don't make money in a hotel is by renting rooms to artists, especially fledgling artists who are just trying to find their way. But he came from a very cultivated family, Hungarian family. He loved the arts, and he loved artists. He learned this from his father. He would meet the artists that would talk to his father, who previously had run the hotel, and he realized, I have to do this too. So Stanley took over. After 50 years, he has now stepped down, which I'll get to a little bit later. But in that time, he made the Chelsea Hotel what it was. Now, this is not a standard business person's goal, right? Is I am going to help create a cultural revolution, which he did. I say that the Chelsea Hotel is the largest artist colony that the United States has ever produced, and longest lasting for over 100 years. The Chelsea Hotel, which never called itself an artist colony, is the greatest artist colony that maybe has ever existed in the United States and possibly even in the world. Why? Because he loved art. Now, he wasn't a stupid businessman. He had a business plan. First, he knew that artists would attract tourists. So he would rent a room to an artist for $300 a month or something like that, and then he knew that if it was a famous enough artist, tourists would want to come to the Chelsea and pay $300 a night rather than $300 a month. So that was part of his business strategy. His other business strategy, which was a little more controversial, was that he knew how to ride the economy through its ups and downs. And he knew when the economy went down, you rent to people who can always pay. And who are they? Pimps, hookers, and drug dealers. They always paid, and they always paid on time. So he reserved the lower floors for the pimps, the hookers, and the drug dealers, and he knew he could make money that way during a bad economy. And then when the economy got improved again, he'd kick them out. Kick them out on the floor, and he'd get back to the artists. So he had a business plan in order to make himself make money. Eventually, he sold the hotel for $80 million, so I think he did okay. But he had to sacrifice higher profits in order to let these artists in. And many of them were fledgling young artists, people who had moved to New York from all over the country because they felt like odd fish in their town, and they knew that if they came to Manhattan, where there's all this diversity, they would not be noticed so much, or they would be accepted better. And then if you go to the Chelsea, that's the epicenter of New York creativity. Anything went in the Chelsea. It was a place of infinite toleration, and anyone could do practically anything there. He knew he wanted artists to thrive, so he sacrificed a little money in order to make that happen, and that was his legacy. This here is his legacy. He was a great patron of the arts, kind of like the Borgias in the Renaissance. Why do we need Bohemians? Does a culture need Bohemians? What does Bohemian mean? Why do we even call them Bohemians? Originally, in Paris, where the first Bohemians were called that, it was because these crazy artists who didn't live by the rules, who didn't seem all that interested in money, and who moved around a lot, were behaving like gypsies. And gypsies were equated with Bohemians from Bohemia in Romania. So they decided to call these crazy artists Bohemians, even though they weren't Bohemians. They were from all over the world and all classes of life. Bohemianism began in the 1820s. So it's been around with the Romantic poets, Shelley, Byron, Keats, in England and the continent. It then moved to Paris in the famous left bank of the Seine, where the Impressionists were working, and they were Bohemian lifestyles all the way, the Impressionists. Later in Paris, you had the great high modernist movement, started in the teens and 20s with the Dadaists, the Surrealists, the Fauvists, the Cubists, Picasso, the Futurists, the Vorticists, the Imagists, all these isms that were proliferating in Paris in the teens and 20s and made it one of the most dynamic, the next best thing to the Renaissance actually, dynamic launchers of what we call modern art in the history of the world. It was an amazing period. After that, it kind of leapt the ocean and came to New York. And the Village became Bohemian Central, with the abstract expressionist painters, with the beat poets, the beat writers. And it became quite a scene in New York, as you probably know. Then after that, you had what? The hippies, the hippie counterculture of the 60s, and the punk rock counterculture of the 70s and 80s. Okay, so we've got all these artistic movements. They give us art, right? That's valuable. And yet I'm saying that they're an endangered species. Well, what do they give us? They give us a new way of seeing the world, for one. Picasso taught us to see in many dimensions from many angles. And doing that, he taught us not to think in absolutes. The Surrealists taught us that the unconscious is a very important part of our lives, and we can't ignore it. Rock and roll music, when it was first launched, was a black medium. Black music came to white people and began to corrode the walls between white and blacks alongside the civil rights movement at the same time. So it gave us that. What did hippies give us? Well, they gave us environmentalism, which is a big one. They also gave us the Whole Foods movement. You know, granola types, they called them. That's what we called them back then. But they gave us the Whole Foods movement. So I would argue that Bohemians have created an immense amount of knowledge and new awareness for our culture, and that we need them. And the fact that they're endangered is a problem. It's something that we need to look at. What's endangering them? I'm a teacher and I'm waiting for someone to yell it out, but gentrification. Gentrification. There's a great book out by Sarah Schulman now called Gentrification of the Mind. And it talks about this phenomenon, both physical gentrification and gentrification of our minds. I'm going to read a definition that Schulman uses to define gentrification. Physically, it is an urban phenomenon, the removal of communities of diverse classes, ethnicities, races, sexualities, languages, and points of view from the central neighborhoods of cities, and the replacement by more homogenized groups. With this comes the destruction of culture and relationship, and this destruction has profound consequences for the future of our cities. Why are cities important to Bohemians? Because they're diverse, they're teeming with energy, lots of different people from lots of different social classes, ethnicities, races are mixing, new kinds of food, tons of artists to be inspired by, and tons of artworks to be inspired by. This is why young fledgling artist Bohemians need big urban centers to thrive in, to create in. But this has changed. This has changed. The Chelsea Hotel, sadly, during the real estate bubble in 2007, the board members kicked Stanley Bard out. He was 1/3 owner of the hotel and the manager. The other 2 board members decided, Stanley, this hotel in Chelsea in 2007 is not making enough money for this neighborhood. Therefore, we want to take it over and make money. Well, they did. And in the process, they kicked out and evicted a lot of the artists there. There are only a few artists still living there now. It's a sad, sad situation. They tried one management company. They failed to make any money off the Chelsea. They tried another management company. It also failed to make any money off of the Chelsea because Stanley knew how to make money off the Chelsea. Ride the economies and bring the tourists in to ogle the artists. That's how you make money. They didn't know that. They weren't as interested in its artistic history, the Chelsea. They just saw it as a piece of property that could be making more money than it was. Now, that's sort of a symptom of a larger trend, right? The Chelsea is a microcosm of a larger trend of gentrification that has occurred. Ask a young artist to go live in the West Village right now, what'll happen? They won't be able to afford it. It's far too expensive to live in Manhattan for young fledgling artists. Maybe not for artists who come from families with money, but for young artists from all over the country who want to gather in the big city and make it, it's out of the question. Well, okay, then go to Brooklyn. Go to Williamsburg. Well, the fact is that even they are becoming too expensive for young fledgling artists to move here. So what are the young artists to do? Maybe small towns. Maybe smaller towns. I live in Savannah, Georgia, which is a pretty hopping scene. You may not imagine it, but Savannah's a pretty cool town if you've been there. And there's a big art school there. So there's a hopping scene in Savannah. But it's not the same. Austin, Texas, I've heard, is a pretty hopping scene right now, too. Nashville, apparently. Interestingly, they're in the South. It's cheaper down there. But what they're missing in these small towns is that high steroid-powered diversity of influence that they can get in a big urban environment like San Francisco, like New York, like Los Angeles. I used to live in San Francisco and went back there a few weeks ago, and I went straight to the Mission District because that's where I used to live and that's where I used to hang with the Bohemians and hang out. The Mission, if you don't know it, was working-class Hispanic and artists, basically. And it was a very lively scene. Well, that's all changed too. Occasionally you'll hit a block where you'll see some artists or some street poets or something like that. But you know what you see? You see Google buses. Are you familiar with the Google bus? The wealthy people from Silicon Valley, San Jose, decided they don't want to live in San Jose. They'd rather live in San Francisco. Who wouldn't? And they decided we're going to colonize the Mission District because rent was cheap there. They went in, they renovated the places, and they brought a lot of money into the Mission. The Mission is no longer a countercultural bohemian enclave at all. It's got beautiful restaurants, beautiful homes, things like that. The neighborhood has been improved, but at a cost, And these Google buses, they're these big rock star buses with black windows that drive employees from San Jose up to San Francisco and deliver them right to their door, and they're creepy. They look like Darth Vader going through the cities of the Mission District. It's really weird. So what's happening in big cities is that they're pushing artists and working class, lower middle class people out into the boroughs or out into wherever they can survive. Most of my old Bohemian friends in San Francisco don't live there anymore. They live in Berkeley, they live in Oakland, they live in the East Bay because that's what they can afford to do. And I'm arguing that something needs to happen. I don't know what. You can't tell real estate developers, hey, can you like trash up your apartments a little bit and make it more accessible to people with no money? Because you're asking them not to make money. So it's a difficult problem, but it's something that we need to look at. It's something that we need to consider. Is it the most terrible problem in the world? No, but I think it will cost us culturally. We will lose our artistic diversity, and it'll become much more homogenized if we don't. And the model that I use is that of the national park system. You know, we're all proud of our national park system in the United States, these wonderful ecosystems where we can go and visit and see natural beauty. Well, it wasn't like the population said, hey, we need national parks, let's do it. There are a lot of people who fought against that. Who would fight against developing the national parks or preserving them? Timber industry, mining industry, ranching and farming industries. They were not interested in national parks. They saw those areas as great resources for them to make money. But enough people got together and decided, this has got to change. We've got something very special here, and we need to preserve it. And ironically, it was an artist who got that started, George Catlin, a painter, a romantic painter of landscapes, in conjunction with an industrialist, Stephen Mather, who made his money in borax. But he also saw the value of these primeval landscapes. And then, of course, Teddy Roosevelt, President Hoover, and President Wilson all got together. So it was a collaboration between artists, businessmen, and politicians that got the national parks to be preserved as they are. And I don't think anyone in here regrets the fact that we've preserved our national parks. What I would like to suggest is maybe something can happen to preserve the ecosystems for Bohemians in urban environments. I don't have any answers. I'd love to talk to you about it, but this is my goal. Let's make national parks for artists and let our culture thrive. Thanks you so much.